2 days ago in the publication Politico, Bill Bishop wrote an op-ed entitled "United, Yes, but Ever More Divided." He asserts that the United States is becoming less a nation than a series of loosely connected islands, in that Americans, as he puts it, each year have less and less in common with citizens who live just a few miles down the road, and that the past generation, quote, has produced a new kind of segregation. We're divided not just by how we look, but by the way we live, by what we think, and like all segregation, this kind has consequences. National and even state conversations become increasingly difficult among people with fewer common experiences.
I think that the country has always, America, and this isn't an original thought by me by any means. I mean, George Bush said it in his first inaugural speech, and Democrats have said it, Derek Bach at Harvard's written a lot about it. But I mean, America as a country is glued together by a set of principles. So it's not like France, where we have this sense of thousands of years of history where we've farmed the same 1 inch of land for generation after generation. It's not a country that's held together by religion or by a long history. I mean, this starts as an enormously diverse country, 13 literally nation states, and it continues with great diversity as immigration comes and changes, the country changes, but it's hugely diverse. And what holds us as Americans is this sense and principle of America. The Constitution, the constitutional principles, these kinds of values of working hard together, of tolerating, of respecting each other, and, in some way, respecting decisions. So if we say something's constitutional, it's right, and it's unconstitutional, we all have a sense it's wrong. It's sort of like your conscience. That's why FDR said in the first inaugural address, he said the Constitution's like the Bible. You have to read it every couple days. And why? Because you have to remind yourself of what holds us together as a we, as opposed to the rest of what we want to do, which is to go backwards into whatever groups we are, states, localities, communities, family, race, gender, sexuality, age, whatever they are, the millions of things that pull us in the other direction. And so I think what he's right about is, of course, this is happening. I mean, there's a book that just came out called The Patchwork Nation, where the guy actually somehow studies or goes to all 3,000 counties in America. And he just shows you this incredible, not just diversity, but division, divisiveness in the country. And so I think, and one of the things that's really terribly happened is, it used to be the job of the public schools, from the framers onward. We said the public schools, even though they're state controlled, the public schools were the place we would go and sort of get the American story, or learn civics, or learn about the Constitution, and basically we've given that up.
A couple answers ago,
We'll get the money in school.
a couple answers ago, you referenced FDR, and in an age where it seems as though we're almost hardwired now in the country to see every issue in left versus right. Every issue is red versus blue. In the book, there's a jarring passage that speaks to the commonality and the common thread between two individuals not generally associated with each other, FDR and Ronald Reagan, in the sense that in the terms of the book, they both seem to inspire attention to the Constitution, albeit from very different perspectives.
So this was a little dispute for a while. Michael, my co-author, Michael Escas, and I had worked this through carefully. And so the idea of civic literacy, about caring for the Constitution, should be the single thing that unites the country, blue and red, or whatever they call it, purple, blue, and red. All these colors ought to be united in the Constitution because, as I said earlier, in response to the earlier question, it's really what makes us Americans. I mean, when in the new naturalization test that the Department of Homeland Security now gives, the new improved one, when they set this forth and established it, they said, this is what you need to know to be an American. And they dropped from it all these things about, what color, what's the background color on the flag, what color are the stars. Well, they still have some goofy questions. But it's a much more serious test about the kinds of stuff about the Constitution. And here's the government saying, well, if you don't know this, you can't be you can't be an American. So, you know, I think this thing about the Constitution is really, knowing about it is a big deal. And so, both on the left and the right, people have made those claims. William Bennett and his History of America that he brought out recently, you know, made the same points. Ronald Reagan, when Ronald Reagan left office, he says, the tradition of a farewell speech is to say what I didn't accomplish. I don't know if that was a tradition, but that's what he said. And then he spent a lot of time discussing how he still didn't think Americans knew enough about the country. Now, it gets a little bit fuzzy when you start to decide, well, what is it that people want to know? So, you know, in other words, we have this word patriotism. And it's not a word that anybody should be ashamed of. It's a powerful and decent and important thing. But, you know, the patriotism, that has, you know, you parse that too. So you can be very a patriotic person and still be critical of the country. In fact, in America, being patriotic basically carries with it an obligation to be critical of it. It's what being a democracy is about. And so some of the battle has, between, some of the, what looks like similarities have ended up in these battles, you know, about you have to support everything in Vietnam War or something like that. But to a large extent, connecting Reagan and FDR on question, I mean, you could, on questions like this, if you take things from their speeches, see how they worry, all of them, about the slippage in public's understanding of it. The best marriage of this I've ever seen was Dwight Eisenhower wrote a letter to a guy named Biggs. And Biggs was a wounded veteran who had watched Eisenhower, he's president at the time, and he watches Eisenhower give a speech in one of the early TV shows when presidents were on it. And Eisenhower's in there, and he's trying to discuss how complicated the particular issue he's talking about is. And Biggs writes him a letter and he says, you've got to say this more, you have to say this more simply, that you know, that this, you're not being certain enough, and he really criticizes Eisenhower, and Eisenhower uses it as an opportunity. And he writes back and he says, Mr. Biggs, American democracy is very, very complicated. And it brings with it great uncertainty and no easy choices as to what is right and wrong. And he says, this is the nature of democracy. And then he says, I suggest you read a little book that I carry with me all the time. And it's not Mayo's book. I don't promise you that. It's a book by the left-wing, seafaring philosopher Eric Hofstra. Little book. And he says, in this book, Hofstra says, and I agree, that the great gift that dictatorships or authoritarian governments bestow on their citizens is the freedom to be ignorant, the freedom to be certain, not to have to worry, not to live in. So, you know, I mean, this is about people who care about the Constitution, no matter what their view on whether health care should be nationally funded or locally funded. Who cares in the larger context of whether or not we are prospectively going to have a democracy that allows us to make these choices?